I don't know how famous or how well known Anil Chitrakar is, but I had the honor, I really say the honor, to meet him maybe 4 years ago, 5 years ago. He gave a talk to our class, and he really helped me to think about uh, what are the different elements? How can we guide people in making this transformation? He's a social entrepreneur. You can Google him. He's a really interesting person. And when he talked to us, he emphasized that we have to know certain things. That's pretty clear. So in our transformation to sustainability, we do need to know some basics, what to do, how to do it, some principles and so forth. That's pretty clear. That's the educational system needs to really be part of the of this process. However, I also think that we need to think about knowing in much broader terms. It's not just the Western educational system. There are local people, indigenous people, for example, here in the United States. They have a deep knowledge about their lands. So knowing means all different forms of wisdom. And just knowing something in your head is not enough. We need to do. We really need to have actions. We have to change. We have to really do it. And the third element is that we really deeply need to think about what is important in life. So I personally think that in the people are sometimes very confused about what is important in life. And I can give a whole lecture on my observations, for example, here in the United States. If you are just focused on making money, there is a poverty in your heart. And so it's important that we also think about values. How do you want to guide your life? So let's move on then, and let me check the time. Because we are dependent on nature, we have to conserve as much natural habitat as possible. And that is true even in cities. And you may have seen articles. What COVID has shown us is that, and it's not just COVID, but if you look at the last 10, 20, 30 years, there have been more and more really serious outbreaks of pandemics, the SARS, Ebola, now COVID, and there are other outbreaks. And one of the hypotheses which seem to be really true is that as natural habitat is shrinking, that that there is the environment is out of balance. Therefore, viruses are more abundant, and also there is more contact between human beings and animals, and that is then leading to a higher risk of pandemics. But also the resilience of people. You may have heard about the studies that have shown that in terms of stress and in terms of your immune system, that being in nature really increases your the strength of your immune system. So it is really important to have natural ecosystems, even in cities. And here, and it actually in New York City, for those of you who have been in New York City, there is a lot of green areas. So as we think about that, most populations will live in urban environments, we need to make sure to have as much green space as possible. And here I'm also showing an aerial view of Kathmandu. And you can see, I don't have a pointer here. I think this is close to the airport. And I hear that there is like a lot of discussions around expanding the airport, which is of course, on one hand, understandable, because with the airport, you bring in tourists. Tourists is a major basis for the Nepali economy. But if you destroy more natural areas in the long term, that is really a problem. And why is it a problem? And it's not just because humans need access to nature, but natural areas, they provide what we call ecosystem services. So you do know, for example, and these are ecosystem services which are provided by nature to us for free. So, for example, if you are in the city and you don't have any green space, you always notice that the city is much hotter because you don't have evapotranspiration of your forests. And so the green spaces in a city provide cooling for, and it's not even part of this here, is it provides climate control for, and reduces what we call the urban heat island effect for the city. We just talked about pest management, that you are healthy, erosion control, and I just talked about how natural habitats are really important with respect to the balance and the control of pandemics. And the example, there have been studies what nature provides us for free. They estimated in terms of climate control, in terms of providing food, in terms of preventing flooding and so forth. If you add up what nature does for us for free, the estimates is that it's as much, if not 3 times as much money we save by saving nature than our worldwide GDP or economy. This is a study from 1997, but the main point is people always say, oh, we cannot afford we need to invest into the economy, but we need to invest into nature because nature gives us all these services for free. And a really important, which you are all familiar, is the example, of course, when we think about deforestation in Nepal. It's a serious problem. The land, because of deforestation, no growth of trees, you have a lot of erosion happening. The soil cannot support the growth of food. Many people move from rural communities into Kathmandu, or they go abroad. And so here it's very clear that the natural communities provided an important service, and now in these areas which are denuded of forests, the daily life support cannot be maintained, right? And of course, Nepal recognizes it, and I don't know how many of you are ecologists or foresters, but Nepal actually worldwide has actually a very unique and promising approach with respect to the community forest approach. And what the world can learn from Nepal is that communities, local communities, are part of the decision-making process, and that is really one important lesson if we want to achieve sustainability. If you don't include the local community, it often fails. And so the community forest, I know there are quite a few criticisms around it too, and problems, but from the outside, I think Nepal can be very proud of being actually leading in this approach around the world. And what are other principles to remember? And I want to, as an ecologist, I'm going back to the fact that we can use nature, the earth. Nature actually lived on earth for 3.8 billion. Oh, I thought billion, it should have been billion, sorry. No, life existed 3.8 million years. And the earth without nature, natural ecosystems, without human interference, knows what to do. So the rest of the presentation, I will go back to using nature as a model. Okay. And so in other words, nature knows best. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the field of biomimicry. Here in the US, there are really many scientists who actually study nature to think about sustainable solutions. So I just wanted to throw this out. And there are lots and lots of examples. Basically, these scientists are asked, they are apprentices of nature, because nature already found lots of solutions. And I'm just giving one example here, and that is the lotus effect. Coming from Nepal, you all are, or in Asia, people are very familiar with the lotus flower. It's an important symbol in Buddhism, in Hinduism. And the interesting fact about lotus fire is flowers, and that's a really incredible example of the biomimicry, is if you look at the leaves here of the lotus flowers, what ecologists discovered in the 50s is they noticed that if it rains, that the raindrops kind of stay kind of on the leaves. So they looked at it closer, and because of evolution, the lotus leaf has developed a structure with these little bumps and with little wax crystal. So if rains comes, it forms these droplets and takes away all the dirt, because the leaves need, of course, sunlight. They shouldn't be covered with dirt. So in the field of biomimicry, what people think about is in cities where you have a lot of smog, you can use this recipe which the lotus flower developed. You can do the self-cleaning paint. So you don't have to repaint your house. It's a sustainable approach. Or they even think about textiles so that you don't have to wash your clothes, but basically by being in rainwater, your coat gets clean just because of the structure and what they learned from or mimicked from nature. And there are lots and lots and lots of examples. And I just wanted to throw this out that yes, nature, we can learn a lot from nature. All right, and so I also wanna share with you a sustainable model in Nepal. I have been working over the last 10 years with the Rohan Memorial Eco Foundation. And that foundation, it's here. It's on the way to Farping. It's outside. It's in Kahara. Nobody knows Kahara, but it's I cannot pronounce it, so excuse me. It's close to Dauda Lake. Dauda Lake. Sometimes people know that, and it exists since maybe 10, 12 years or something like that. And going back to the knowing, doing, and being, they have their motto or their guiding values are respect, integrity, dignity, productivity, trust, and the last one I cannot, incisiveness maybe. So they really thought about what is important, what are the guiding principles for their community KRMF Foundation. And the people Krishna and Leela, they are basically the people who started the foundation. And now there are, I think, over 57 people working there. Their two daughters are also involved in the foundation. So if we think about sustainability and dealing with addressing all the environmental, social problems, one of nature's principle is everything is connected to everything else. And some of you may have encountered, it's the basics of systems thinking. Actually, the Buddha already recognized it too. But in the Western world, even in our educational system, we often ignore this important lesson that everything is connected to everything else. So as we create a world which is sustainable, we have to recognize that the economy is not separate from human health, from the environment, and so forth. So how does the KRMF kind of include that principle in their approach? And they have a holistic approach. So what they do is they don't just talk about one thing about sustainability. They started out with a clinic for the people. They have work opportunities, and I will talk a little bit about it. They have organic gardens. They have a school. They have sustainable buildings, and they think about energy. So what you see here is, if we think about sustainability, there are all different aspects of life we have to include in our plan for sustainability. So, and that is true in nature too. If you closely look, everything is connected. And what is important about that too is it's not just that everything is connected, but everything is in balance. And that balance, we don't appreciate it enough. We pay attention to one thing often in our society and don't think about the other components. And the other nature's principle is that there is not such a thing as a free lunch. Basically, if our society here in the United States and in the West is centered around economic growth. Everything is about economic growth, but there are limits because everything has consequences, and everything uses resources from nature, and we have to recognize that there are consequences when we use all the different resources for productivity, for all of our stuff, and there are limits. And I want to illustrate that with an example with the buildings we use, and in this case in Kathmandu. Well, traditionally, you do know that most buildings, because of the beautiful Nevari architecture, many buildings are made out of brick. But because of modern development, there have been concrete buildings or cement. And based on the earthquake, we all know that there have been problems, of course, with respect to brick and also cement buildings. They were much more vulnerable for collapse, and there are many reasons for that. But let me dig a little bit deeper, which people don't know about it. So the building materials in Kathmandu are the major cause for air pollution and therefore respiratory problems. And you all know about the air pollution in the Kathmandu Valley. And here I'm talking about total suspended particles. You know, if we think about air pollution, we have to think about the particles, and they were measured in different places in the Kathmandu Valley. But there are also other air pollutants, of course, like nitrous oxide and so forth. Here, I'm just talking about the particles which actually clog, if you breathe in, they clog your areoles and there is no oxygen exchange. And what you see here is that the brick kilns, which are all over the Kathmandu Valley, and the cement factories, 35%. So more than 76% of the air pollution is, in terms of the total suspended particles, is actually due to how we think about building our buildings, right? So if we go back to this principle, bricks are actually becoming limited because also the areas which you used to grow rice, they are used now to make bricks. And so the landscape slowly deteriorates and produces a lot of air pollution. So we need to think about what to do then about our building materials. And what many people don't realize is concrete is actually a terrible material if we think about sustainability. And why is that? Concrete needs sand as a resource, and sand is disappearing worldwide because you cannot, it's a special sand needs a certain structure to be functional for concrete, and it's mainly from beaches. And here I'm showing a picture from Dubai. And to build Dubai, the city of Dubai, it's so unsustainable. They have had to truck in the sand from Australia in order to make the concrete. So many people don't know that concrete is actually a limiting resource. It's not sustainable. So what approach does the Kevin Rohan Memorial Foundation do? And I need to get my, okay, it's 7:15. Oh, I have to hurry up a little bit. So they use bottles. They collected bottles, and this was their first prototype. And because bricks are expensive, but because bottles are a waste product, cheap. If you collect bottles and you can make the houses, it can even poorer people, instead of living in slums, can actually have a dignified house. And here I'm showing you pictures. It's actually quite pretty, these bottle houses. And here is another building. So they started out with a small building, but then they built a larger building. And interesting enough, it's actually a 3-4-story building made out of bottles. And the houses surrounding the Nkuran building in the earthquake collapsed. There were only a few small cracks in the Nkuran building because it has some flexibility. They also use other waste materials, plastic bottles. But the more interesting build are what is called the eco-brick buildings. The eco-brick buildings are actually compressed soil, loam, and it's not fired, and so it is bricks, and it's solid, but you don't have the air pollution with it. And they built in Kahara, I think 40 or 50 different buildings, and they gave it to the poorest people. I actually know the girls here, and their father had committed suicide. They were incredible poor, and they have a house now, which is very lovely. Made me very happy. They also have now the first, what is called the straw bale house. And if you think about buildings, straw is actually a waste product of farming. You can, they used rice straw there, and it's actually quite a nice house. And it uses local and natural materials. So the buildings are also an example for the other nature's principles. Everything must go somewhere. There is no waste product, and in their approach, using bottles, using straw, they follow the principles, life wastes nothing and upcycles everything. And examples for that are also that you can use, for example, wrappers to make baskets. They don't do that anymore, but they used to weave tote bags instead of plastic bags. And what is really important here is they employ now, I think, over 50, 60 people, and they empower women. And they are having a jewelry making shop, and they are using soap nut. Americans don't know what soap nuts are, but you are all familiar. I assume that you are all familiar with soap nuts. And what they do is they use then the shell to make cleaning, and also shampoo and so forth as a natural detergent. And then the seed they make jewelry out of. So it provides, it's of course sold to Western tourists in part, right? But it gives an income to women in the village who wouldn't have a job. So they make actually a beautiful jewelry. So what the foundation does also is they follow another principle that live within our solar energy income. And as you are very familiar with, and it goes also into the second principle, that fossil fuels are a limiting resource. And you, after 2015, you remember all, I'm sure, when the Indian border closed again, you couldn't get the propane in, and fossil fuel was really limiting. So if we think about the energy consumption, and that goes back to the deforestation, most of the energy, and this is from 10 years, 11 years ago, most energy is still coming from fuel wood. And because that is unsustainable, we have to think about other solutions. So what does KRMF do? They are actually making biobriquettes. So what are biobriquettes? You see in these buckets, they collected old waste paper, old and straw, and it is soaked, and then they have this simple machine, and they make these briquettes, which you see on the left-hand side, and they are compressed, very dense, low health impact. They don't produce much smoke, and you can use these biobriquettes for cooking. And that is actually also promoted by other ICMOT. It's the institute who thinks also about sustainability, and it's in Godavari. And you can use all different kind of waste products for these biobriquettes. So you don't need to burn cut wood, or you don't need to burn fuel. Then a very promising solution for Nepal is, of course, biogas, because the cow is, of course, a sacred animal, and many people have cows for the milk production. And so what you can do is you can use the dung and make a slurry, and the bacteria produce then methane. And I think 1 or 2 cows can provide enough biogas for a family, and it's very simple. It could be done all over Nepal, or you can also use buffalo or other waste products. And then you, of course, you know the solar cookers you might be very familiar with. And another aspect of this, that life runs on current sunlight, we need to think about how we grow food locally. The approach here in the US is very unsustainable, and of course in Nepal it's much more grown locally. But I still get, if you go to the market, the apples come from China and the mangoes come from India sometimes. And so it's important to grow your own food. And They do organic healthy food, and they have what's called biodynamic approach, and they grow their tomatoes, their vegetables. But what they did, they have bees, but what they did in order to have an extra income and not be dependent on foreigners bringing money in is they built now the Leila's Eco Cafe, where they also sell the eggs and preserved materials. And here you see a picture of the Eco Cafe. That's me. Slisha knows Len. This was
Yeah.
with the class. This was with the class when we came 4 years ago. So it's a lovely. If you ever go on the way to Farping, check it out. Delicious food. And what is important about their approach to farming is that they support the soil. And I did a little research. I did a little study, and I looked at soil organic matter. And what you see is in their farming, the soil organic matter really improved, as did other elements in the soil. And why is this critical? Is because in order to counterbalance the greenhouse effect, we can store a lot of carbon in the soil. And so thinking about how we grow our food is really, really critical, and KRMEF is a model for it. And they do compost workshops for the people. Let me just check. We are almost out of time, right? So
Yeah.
let me just, I'm going quickly now, the other elements. So what is great there also is they have a school, and the school, they are integrated also in the garden and so forth. And they are in the bottle house, very creative. They had a beautiful playground. They have a clinic. And now one of their daughters, she just came back from Bangladesh. She's a doctor now, and she provides health for the community. After the earthquake, they did health camps. And now they, of course, with respect to COVID, they do a lot of hunger relief. And we are actually collecting now also money with respect to the poorest people in the community. And so here we are back at COVID. And thank you. I know it was a little quick, and I usually always interact with students, so I was talking against a wall. But I am more than happy to answer some questions because I went a little quick through it. And I also gave here my address in case you wanna, I'm happy to answer questions. If you wanna hear more about KRMEF, they are always happy to have volunteers. I'm actually on the board of directors, and I am happy to connect you to, if you Google KRMEF, you can, Krishna knows that I'm giving this talk today, so he's prepared. So anyway, that's
Thank
what I
you.
have. So
Thank you so much, Renate. It was incredible. Thank you so much. It's amazing to see how much you know about Nepal. And I've been getting texts like, oh my gosh, you know so much about Nepal. This is incredible, and this is unbelievable. Thank you so much.
well,
And
I want to make sure one thing is, and I'm kind of curious about others. People always think the other countries are the best, and I really want to. I am very aware that Nepal has problems, but you can be proud of so many things. And that's why I'm bringing students to Nepal, because we can learn so much from each other. And that's the important part.
So true, so true. And I highly, highly encourage everybody to go check out Kevin Rohan Memorial Foundation.